Once upon a time, there lived a princess whose hair was black as obsidian and whose skin was white as snow. They called her Snow White. When she was young, the poor girl lost her parents and was left to be raised by only the queen, her stepmother, who was dreadfully jealous of the young girl for her beauty and for the love that the people had for her. So she was ordered to do chores and be treated like a servant in the castle. She would do the laundry and clean windows and sweep. Her only friends were the little birds and the animals who came to frequent the castle. Then one day, a prince was riding by on his horse and heard the beautiful song of the young princess from over the castle wall. Her voice was so beautiful, so angelic, that he couldn't resist climbing over the wall to see who this melodious voice belonged to. One heart and ever entreating, constantly true. When he reached the top and looked over into the courtyard of the castle, he was surprised to see the princess kneeling on the stone ground, cleaning as she hummed to herself. Little birds surrounded her, keeping her company, and slowly, cautiously, he approached her. Apparently, she didn't notice at first, because when she looked up, she was so startled that she ran inside. But he could still see her peering out the window. In hopes of charming the beautiful princess, he begins to sing himself. The lovely voice of the prince drifts through the courtyard, and she watches him, curious, not wanting to push his luck. He calls out to her, "My princess, I hope I haven't frightened you. I only heard your singing and wished to meet you." And with that, he climbed back over the wall and disappeared. Snow White knew she shouldn't just trust strangers, especially ones who climb over her walls, but she had to admit he was quite handsome, and in spite of the unconventional way in which he approached her, there was something about him that intrigued her. The next day, the queen gazed into her mirror and summoned the spirit within. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? In this great kingdom, my queen, it is you who is fairest in all the land, save for one pure soul." "Who?" she demanded. "The young princess. She, and she alone, surpasses you in her beauty." The queen scowls into the mirror, and with a flourish of her cape, she turns and storms out of the chamber. If she is all that stands in my way, I must eliminate this child once and for all. So she summoned a hunter, one she believed had a heart of stone and could not be swayed from the task she wished him to perform. She handed the hunter a small box, just big enough for a heart. And so the hunter went out with Snow White, under the charade of picking wildflowers in the meadows beyond the castle. And as the princess, unaware of the evil intentions of the hunter, bent down to pick wildflowers, he approached, a dagger in his hand. As he stood over her, about to plunge the dagger into her back, she turned and gasped. But as the hunter gazed into her lovely face, he couldn't bear to end his beautiful life. The sweet child stared back at him in horror. The dagger dropped from his hand. "Princess, you must go. You must leave this place and never return. The queen has asked me to kill you. I cannot do it, but if you return to the castle, she may kill you herself. Please, princess, run away. I will tell her you're dead, but you must never return. Please, go. Go!" The princess, frightened, turned and bolted into the forest, tripping over roots and brambles and thorns, scratching red, angry marks into her skin. As she ran deeper and deeper into the woods, it grew darker and darker. The trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled branches twisting into forms that looked like ghouls and monsters. They seemed to reach out for her and scratch at her skin, pulling at her dress and her hair. But she ran on, tearing through the forest as fast as she could, until finally she tripped and fell, crying in terror, sadness. How could her own stepmother have wished her dead? She knew that she'd always been jealous, but this was farther than she ever thought the queen would go. "Where will I go? What will I do?" she cried into the forest. And after a moment, some of the animals who recognized her voice approached, wondering whatever was wrong. The rustle of the trees and bushes startled her at first, but when a little rabbit hopped out, followed by some chipmunks and squirrels and some little songbirds, she started to laugh. "I know you. You visit me at the castle, don't you?" she said to them. They twittered and chirped and waved their tails. "What will I do?" she asked them. "I can't go back. The hunter said the queen wants me dead. But where will I go? I have no place to live," she told them. They stared at her for a moment, tilting their heads, listening. And then they looked at each other and began to turn away and hop into the forest, turning back as if to say, "Aren't you coming?" She hesitated for a moment, unsure what they wanted. But then a couple of the squirrels came running back and pawed at her dress, a couple of them jumping onto her lap and then jumping off and leading her on into the forest. Following them for only a short while, she soon came upon a little cottage with a thatched roof and a tiny stream with a little stone bridge. Who lives here?" she asked them. Of course, she didn't expect them to answer, but she approached the house and knocked on the door. "Hello? Is anyone here?" There was no answer. She knocked again, a little harder. "Hello? Please, I need help. I'm looking for shelter, just for a night, perhaps." No answer. She tried the door, wondering if the cottage was abandoned. To her surprise, it opened, but when she stepped through the doorway, it was clear that the house was not abandoned, at least not permanently, for whoever lived there had left dishes and clothes and shoes lying about. It was messy, but it was also about the most adorable little home she had ever seen. Whoever lived here must not be home, she thought. She looked around at the pictures and the old wooden carvings and the decorations that adorned the walls. Gosh, it must have been ages since they cleaned this place. Perhaps, she turned to the animals who had followed her inside. Perhaps if I cleaned up their house, maybe they'd let me stay. Do you think? A few of the birds chirped, and the squirrels swished their tails. And Snow White got to work. A few hours later, she found herself climbing the stairs, curious as to what might be up there. Upstairs was only one room, and the walls were lined with 7 little beds. They looked like children's beds, each with their own little symbol carved into the headboard and baseboard. Gosh, I'm so tired after all that cleaning. Perhaps I'll just rest for a moment. Just for a little while until they return. She curled up on one of the beds, and before she knew it, she was fast asleep. That evening, the dwarves who lived in this cottage were on their way home, whistling and singing songs all the way. But when they reached their cottage, they could tell something was different. "What happened?" said Doc. "Everything's so clean," said Happy. "Looks like somebody broke into the house," said Sleepy, yawning. "It's witchcraft," said Grumpy. "Witchcraft," Happy laughed. "Somebody broke into our house and cleaned it? Is that what you're saying, Grumpy?" "I'm telling you, witches are wily creatures. They'll do anything to get in your head. There may be a witch in this room right now, watching us," he whispered into Dopey's ear, and Dopey started shivering nervously. "Well, let's investigate," Doc said. They looked around the room, shocked at how clean it was, but they found no trace of any person until they began to creep up the stairs and peer into the bedroom. At first, they were shocked to see something or someone lying on the bed in the darkness. Lighting the lamp by the door, they realized it wasn't a monster or a witch, as far as they could tell, but a girl, a beautiful young girl. That's the princess," Doc said, seeing her beautiful clothes that only royalty would possess. What should we do?" Happy said. "Well, I suppose we should wake her, shouldn't we?" Doc suggested. Uh, Miss? Snow White opened her eyes and looked up. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just fell asleep. I'm so sorry. No one was home, and well, something happened. Something horrible happened, and I just needed a place to stay, and I thought maybe if I cleaned, you might. Miss, may I ask, are you the princess? Doc asked. Well, yes, I am, she answered. They all gasped. Your Majesty, it is an honor to have you as our house guest, but what are you doing here? Well, you see, my stepmother, the queen, she wanted to have me killed. The hunter she sent spared my life, but I can't return to the castle or she will kill me. The dwarves gasp again. The queen? But why would she want you? She's always been jealous of me, I suppose. I never thought she would go this far, but please, may I stay with you just for a while until I find somewhere to go. Of course, Your Majesty, you are welcome as long as you wish. We would be honored to have you stay with us. Although this little cottage is probably not what you're used to. Snow White laughed. You'd be surprised. The queen wasn't exactly, well, charitable after my father died. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, let me make you dinner. It's the least I can do. Your Majesty, you needn't go to any trouble for us. No, I insist. Please, allow me to make you dinner, as a thank you. I'll make gooseberry pie. Gooseberry pie? Really? Well, I suppose we couldn't say no to that, could we? Happy laughed. Snow White rose from the bed, and they all followed her downstairs. As she cooked and they brought her the ingredients she needed, they told her about their life in the cottage and their job working in the mine. She told them about her life working in the castle, the queen, and the prince who came to visit her. Soon they were sitting around the table, laughing and talking as if they'd known each other forever, as if they were all old friends. And after dinner, the dwarves insisted on putting on a little performance for her. They played songs and she danced and sang. And finally, at the end of the evening, when they were all exhausted from a long day and contented after a lovely meal, they all sat down and asked her to tell them a story or sing them a song. Something beautiful, they requested. Something about love. Someday my prince will come. Someday we'll meet again. And away to his castle we'll go, to be happy forever, I know. the time she'd finished, they were all asleep wherever they sat or laid, and she giggled to herself. Good night, and thank you. She quietly made her way upstairs, curled up on one of the beds, and fell asleep. The next morning, she gave them all a bit of bread and waved goodbye to them as they headed out to the mine for their day's work. As they worked and she stayed home to clean and cook and maintain their little cottage, she went out and picked berries with the animals. She made pies for each of the dwarves. She swept and cleaned, and when she was done, she went out to sit by the stream and talk to the animals and hum to herself. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the queen had been scheming. Down in her dungeon, she'd pulled out an old book of spells. Witchcraft was not something she'd done in a long time, but extreme circumstances called for extreme measures. When the hunter brought back the heart of a pig, she banished him from the kingdom and decided to take matters into her own hands. She turned herself into a hag so that the princess wouldn't recognize her, and then poisoned an apple with a sleeping spell whose only cure was a kiss from the true love of the victim. Ha! True love, the queen laughed scornfully. Who in this kingdom would ever truly love a princess for anything but her money or her beauty? And so she made her way into the forest, tracking the princess with a spell. And when she spotted the girl sitting on the rocks with the animals, she chuckled to herself, and then casually approached the princess as if she was simply a poor woman seeking shelter. Hello, my child. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? She said. The princess looked up. Oh, yes, it's a lovely day. The queen, disguised as a hag, coughed, and the princess rose. Ma'am, are you all right? Why don't you come inside? I'll get you some water. Why, thank you, my dear, the old witch creaked, and let the princess walk her inside. The animals stared at the witch. There was something off about her. They could feel it, but they couldn't tell exactly what it was. They followed the two to the door and watched from the windows. As Snow White drew up some water from the well and gave her a ladle, the animals watched the old hag pull something out of her pocket, and their eyes widened. A couple of the birds flew in through the window, chirping in Snow White's ear, trying to tell her that something was wrong. But Snow White brushed them away. Stop it, she scolded them. What has gotten into you? The birds glanced at each other and then moved on to the witch, trying to get the old hag to reveal the secret she was hiding from the girl. Stop that at once. Leave the poor old woman alone. She waved at them, and finally they flew back out the window, still chattering anxiously to each other. Please, my dear, try one of my apples. They're from my own garden. I've grown them myself. Please, for your generosity, take a bite. She handed Snow White the glistening red apple. Please, my dear, allow me to share with you. Well, I suppose I haven't had lunch yet. Thank you. Snow White took the apple from the old woman and the animals watched in horror, realizing there was nothing they could do. But perhaps if they could get the dwarves to talk to her, to see the witch. They all ran off into the forest towards the mines to retrieve her new friends, in hopes that they might see this old woman for who she really was. As they took off, Snow White drew the apple up to her mouth and took a bite. "Oh, it's delicious." Suddenly, her throat began to close up, and those were the last words she spoke. As she fell to the ground, the apple rolling across the floor from her limp hand. Meanwhile, the animals rushed in, chirping and clawing and pulling at the dwarves, trying to get them to come. At first, the dwarves resisted, confused and outraged at the animals' behavior. What has gotten into these animals? "Doesn't Snow White have animal friends? She says she talks to them at the castle," said Sleepy. "The animals. Snow White must be in danger. Come on, men, we've got to go." They raced out of the mine and followed the animals back to the cottage. But when they got there, it was too late. The witch was gone, and Snow White lay nearly lifeless on the floor. Though her heart still beat, her mind and body were still. The dwarves, devastated with grief, decided to build her a beautiful glass coffin so that if someday her charming prince were to come looking for her, perhaps she might wake up. And so they kept watch over her for weeks, months. Half of them would go to the mine while the other stayed back to watch the princess, to ensure no harm ever came to her. The seasons passed. Snow came and went. And then a familiar humming came to them. The voice drew closer until a face appeared among the trees. "Why, that must be the prince. The prince the princess spoke about." They ran up to him and explained everything. The prince listened, saddened by this story and angered by the queen's actions. Then he looked up and saw the princess in her beautiful glass coffin, her beauty as magnificent as ever, even in her sleeping death. "Her heart still beats, Your Majesty, but she won't wake. Her heart still beats," the prince repeated, thinking, I know this spell. Please, will you take off the top of the coffin?" The dwarves looked at each other, confused and hesitant. But slowly they surrounded the coffin and lifted up the top, placing it on the ground beside her. The prince stepped up to the coffin and traced the back of his fingers along her lovely cheek. "I should have come sooner. I should have found you. I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day that we met. I know that you don't know me very well, but perhaps there's a chance." Slowly, he leaned down and gently placed a kiss on her lovely red lips. "I'm so sorry." Then slowly, she opened her eyes and looked at him. What happened? The last thing I remember, It was the witch, the evil queen, disguised herself. She tried to poison you, Your Majesty. Poison me? She looked up at the prince. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. I should have known that she would find me. And what has happened to the queen? The dwarves explained that after they had found her in the cottage, they had gone after the witch, and in their chase, she had slipped and fallen off a cliff. She was dead. You're free of her, Your Majesty. You're safe now. My dear Snow White, the prince finally said, may I have the honor of escorting you back to the castle? The honor would be mine, Your Majesty. She smiled and kissed him gently. Come, let us return to your kingdom, he said. Not long after, the two were married and the kingdoms joined, and they all lived happily ever after.